I thought her smile was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. I gave her everything, my savings, my dignity, my future. But that smile, it was never meant for me. It was meant for my wallet. I was sitting in that bar on Fields Avenue, nursing my third San Miguel, watching the crowd move like I wasn't even there. The music was too loud, some remix of a song I didn't recognize, and the girls were all dancing on the small stage, smiling at every foreigner who walked through the door. 2 months in the Philippines, and I still felt like a ghost. Barbara had been gone 3 years, but some nights it felt like yesterday. The heart attack took her fast. One morning she was making coffee. The next she was on the floor, and I was screaming into the phone for an ambulance that came too late. I came here to escape Sydney, to escape the empty house, the silent mornings, the way everyone back home looked at me with pity. My kids called once a month if I was lucky. "Dad, you doing okay?" They'd ask, but I could hear the obligation in their voices. I hated that look. I hated the pity. I just wanted to feel something again. Anything. Then she walked over. I didn't see her coming. I was staring into my beer, lost in my own head, when I heard her voice. "You look sad," she said. Her voice was soft, almost shy, nothing like the loud aggressive pitches I'd gotten used to in these bars. I looked up and there she was. Young, sure, maybe mid-20s, but it wasn't that. It was her smile. God, that smile. It reached her eyes in a way I hadn't seen in years. There was something genuine about it. Something that made my chest ache. "I'm all right," I said, but my voice cracked a little. She sat down across from me without asking, folding her hands on the table like we were old friends meeting for coffee. "You don't look all right," she said. "You look like you've lost something." I let out a laugh that sounded more like a sigh. "That obvious?" "Only to someone who knows what it feels like," she said. "You're Australian?" she asked, tilting her head slightly. "Sydney," I said. "You?" "Pampanga. Small town outside San Fernando. You wouldn't know it." She laughed. And it wasn't the practiced laugh I'd heard from the other girls working the bars. It sounded real. Warm, human. "What's your name?" I asked. "Samira," she said. "And you?" "Bryce." "Bryce," she repeated, testing it out. "That's a strong name." We talked for hours. She asked about my life, my work, why I came to the Philippines. I told her about the construction business I'd run for 30 years, about the houses I'd built, the crews I'd managed, the long days under the Australian sun. I told her about my kids, 2 sons and a daughter, all grown now with families of their own. "They don't call much," I admitted. "They're busy. I get it." "That's sad," she said, and I could see she meant it. Family should stay close. I told her about Barbara, how we'd met when we were young, how she'd stuck with me through the lean years when the business was just getting started, how she'd made our house a home, how I'd come home every night to the smell of dinner cooking and her voice calling from the kitchen. "I'm sorry," she said, and she reached across the table and touched my hand, just for a second. But I felt it everywhere. My skin burned where her fingers had been. "My father died when I was 12, she continued, her voice quieter now. "Heart attack. Just like that. One day he was there, the next he wasn't. I know what it's like to lose someone. It changes you." I wanted to ask if she worked there, if this was part of the job, if she was playing me like I'd heard they all did, but I didn't. I didn't want to know. I just wanted to sit there and pretend that this conversation was real, that this connection I felt wasn't something I was buying. She didn't ask me for anything that night. No lady drink, no bar fine, no hints about rent or phone bills or sick relatives. She just talked to me like I was a person, not a wallet with legs. When the bar started emptying out and the music finally got turned down, I realized it was past midnight. "I should go," I said, standing up. She stood too, and for a moment we just looked at each other. "Will you come back tomorrow?" she asked. "If you want." There was something vulnerable in the way she said it, like she actually cared about the answer. "I'd like that," I said. "Then I'll be here," she said, and she smiled again, that smile. When I left, she walked me to the door. The bouncer gave me a nod, and I stepped out into the thick, humid night. My apartment was only a 10-minute walk, but I took my time, letting the night air cool my face. That night, lying in bed with the fan rattling above me, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about her voice, her laugh, the way she looked at me like I mattered, like I was more than just another lonely old man in a foreign country throwing money at young girls. I told myself to be careful. I'd heard the stories. Hell, I'd seen them firsthand. Western guys falling for bar girls, spending everything they had, getting played and discarded. I wasn't stupid, but I was so tired of being alone, so tired of waking up to silence, so tired of feeling like my life was over just because Barbara's was. Maybe this was different. Maybe she was different. I wanted to believe that so badly. I needed to believe it. The next day I went back to the bar at 7. I'd spent the whole day thinking about whether I was being an idiot, whether this was the beginning of something beautiful or something that would destroy me. But in the end, I went. I had to. She was already there, sitting at a corner table away from the stage, and when she saw me, her whole face lit up. "You came," she said, standing up. "I wasn't sure you would." "I said I would," I replied, sitting down across from her. "I don't break my promises." "Not many men keep their word," she said. "I'm learning that." We fell into conversation, like we'd known each other for years. She told me more about her life, about growing up poor in a farming village where the roads turned to mud during rainy season and electricity was unreliable. Her father had grown rice but never made enough to get ahead. When he died, everything fell on her mother's shoulders. "Mama tried to keep us together," Samira said. "But there were 5 of us kids. Ben is the oldest. He's 32 now. Then my 2 sisters. They're both married with kids. Then my younger brother. He's still in school. I'm in the middle. And you're the one who left to work," I said. She nodded. "Someone had to. Ben does what he can, but it's not enough. My sisters have their own families to feed. So I came to Angela's City 2 years ago. Do you like it here?" I asked. She looked around the bar, at the flashing lights and the girls on stage and the foreign men nursing their drinks. "No," she said simply, "but it pays the bills." I wanted to ask more, to dig deeper, but something in her eyes told me not to push, not yet. Over the next few weeks we saw each other almost every day. She'd text me in the morning, "Good morning, Bryce. Have you eaten breakfast?" And I'd text back, "Not yet. Want to join me?" And she would. We'd meet at small restaurants, the kind tourists never found, where the menu was in Tagalog and the food was cheap and good. She'd order for both of us, laughing when I struggled with the unfamiliar dishes. "Try this," she'd say, pushing a plate toward me. "It's called sisig. Pork, onions, chili. Very good." I'd take a bite and my mouth would catch fire and she'd laugh so hard she'd have to cover her mouth. "Too spicy?" she'd ask. "Just a bit," I'd say, reaching for my water, and she'd laugh even harder. She showed me parts of the city I never would have found on my own. Back alleys where vendors sold fresh mangoes and rambutans. A small church tucked behind a busy street where she said she prayed every Sunday. A park where families gathered in the evenings, kids running around while parents sat on benches talking. "This is my favorite place in the city," she said one evening as we sat on a bench watching the sun set. "Why?" I asked. "Because it reminds me that normal life still exists," she said. "That not everything here is bars and foreigners and this." She waved her hand vaguely. I understood what she meant. One afternoon she took me to a market and taught me how to haggle. "You're paying too much," she scolded when I tried to buy a shirt. "They see a foreigner and they triple the price." She turned to the vendor and started rapid firing in Tagalog, her hands gesturing, her voice rising and falling. The vendor argued back but eventually relented. She turned to me triumphantly. 200 pesos. You were about to pay 600. My hero, I said, and she laughed and linked her arm through mine. It felt natural, like we'd been doing this for years. One evening, after we'd had dinner at a small grill near her apartment, she taught me Tagalog phrases. Say, kumusta ka, she said. Kumusta ka, I repeated. Good, that means how are you? Now say, salamat, salamat, thank you. Now say, maganda ka, maganda ka. What's that mean? It means you're beautiful, she said, smiling. Now say, mahal kita, mahal kita. And that? It means I love you, she said, her voice softer now. But don't say it unless you mean it. I didn't say it, not yet, but I was thinking it. I paid for everything. Meals, transportation, her time when she wasn't working. It felt natural. She never asked directly, but I could see the relief in her eyes when I handed over cash for a taxi or covered a bill without hesitation. One night, she came to my apartment and we watched a movie on my laptop, some old American film I'd seen a dozen times. She fell asleep halfway through, her head resting on my shoulder. I didn't move. I just sat there, feeling her breathe, feeling the weight of her against me. I thought about Barbara, about the thousands of nights we'd sat together just like this, about how much I'd taken that for granted, about how desperately I wanted it back. Samira stirred and opened her eyes. Sorry, she mumbled. I'll sleep on the couch. She looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. Okay. That night I lay on the couch, staring at the ceiling, listening to her breathe in the next room, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. She talked about her childhood a lot. The way her father used to take her fishing in the river before dawn, how they'd sit in silence waiting for the fish to bite while the world slowly woke up around them. How her mother made the best adobo in the province, slow cooked until the pork fell apart. How she dreamed of going to college, but there was never enough money. What would you study? I asked one day as we walked through a shopping mall, the air conditioning, a blessed relief from the heat outside. Nursing, she said without hesitation. I want to help people. Real help, you know, not just serving drinks and smiling at men who don't see me as a person. The bitterness in her voice caught me off guard. Is that how you feel? Like they don't see you? Most of them, yes, she said. But not you. You're different, Bryce. You actually listen. I started imagining things I had no right imagining, bringing her to Sydney, getting her into nursing school. Dad, she's just using you. But I didn't care. For the first time in 3 years, I felt like I had something to live for, someone who needed me. Someone who saw me as more than just a sad old widower counting down the days. One evening we were sitting on my balcony, the city spread out below us, and she turned to me. Can I ask you something? Anything, I said. Why me? There are so many girls in that bar. Prettier girls. Younger girls. Why did you choose me? I thought about it for a moment. Because you were the only one who didn't treat me like a customer, I said. You treated me like a person. She smiled, but there was something sad in it. You're a good man, Bryce. I hope you know that. I reached over and took her hand. She didn't pull away. That night, after she left, I sat alone in my apartment and thought about how much my life had changed in just a few weeks. I'd come to the Philippines to escape, to hide, to wait out the rest of my days in a place where no one knew me and I didn't have to pretend to be okay. But Samira made me want to be okay. She made me want to try again. I convinced myself this was real, that what we had was special, that I wasn't just another mark in a long line of lonely foreigners. I told myself she cared about me, that the way she laughed at my jokes and held my hand and fell asleep on my shoulder meant something. I needed it to mean something, because if it didn't, Then what was I doing here? What was any of this for? I pushed the doubts away. I silenced the small voice that whispered warnings. I chose to believe. And that choice, that desperate need to believe, would cost me everything. I want you to meet my family, Samira said one morning over breakfast. We were sitting in a little cafe near my apartment, the kind of place where the coffee was too sweet and the eggs were always overdone. But the owner knew Samira by name and always gave us the table by the window. I looked up from my plate, a piece of toast halfway to my mouth. Your family? Yes, she said, and she reached across the table and took my hand. Her fingers were warm, small in mine. You're important to me, Bryce. I want them to meet you. I want them to know the man who's been so good to me. I felt something warm spread through my chest. Important. When was the last time someone said that to me? When was the last time I felt like I mattered to another human being? Okay, I said. When? This weekend. We can take a bus to my hometown. It's only a few hours. We can stay overnight if you want, or come back the same day. Whatever you're comfortable with. I'd like that, I said, and I meant it. That Saturday we left early. I met Samira at the bus station at 6 in the morning, the sun just starting to burn through the haze. She was waiting for me with a small bag slung over her shoulder, wearing a simple dress I'd never seen before. She looked younger somehow, less like the girl from the bar and more like someone's daughter heading home. The bus was cramped and hot, packed with locals hauling bags of rice and vegetables, chickens in cages, children squirming in their parents' laps. We squeezed into a seat near the back, our legs pressed together, her head finding its natural place on my shoulder as the bus lurched forward. Thank you for coming, she said quietly. This means a lot to me. You don't have to thank me, I said. I want to meet them. The ride took nearly 4 hours. We passed through towns that all looked the same. Concrete buildings with faded paint and rusting metal roofs. Street vendors selling grilled corn and boiled eggs. Children playing in the dirt. The landscape gradually shifted from urban sprawl to rice fields, endless green stretching to the horizon, farmers bent over in the mud, water buffaloes standing still as statues. Samira pointed things out as we went. That's where I went to elementary school, she said, gesturing at a small concrete building set back from the road. The roof leaked so bad we had to bring umbrellas when it rained. Did you like school? I asked. I loved it, she said. I was good at it too. Always top of my class. My teachers said I should go to university, but after Papa died. She trailed off and I squeezed her hand. We arrived in her hometown just before noon. It was smaller than I expected, barely more than a cluster of houses along a dirt road, a single store selling basics, a basketball court where a group of teenage boys were playing despite the heat. Samira led me down a narrow lane, past houses that seemed to lean against each other for support, corrugated metal roofs held down with old tires and pieces of wood. Her family's house was at the end of the lane, a small concrete structure with walls that hadn't seen paint in years. The windows had bars but no glass, just wooden shutters hanging at odd angles. The yard was dirt, a few chickens pecking around, a skinny dog sleeping in the shade of a scraggly tree. Kuya Ben met us at the door before we even reached it. He must have been watching for us. He was older than Samira, maybe early 30s, with a weathered face and hands that looked like they'd done hard labor their whole life. But his smile was wide and genuine. You must be Bryce, he said in careful English, shaking my hand with a grip that was firm but not aggressive. Samira told us about you. Welcome. Welcome. Come in. Come in. Inside, the house was dim and bare. The main room had concrete floors, a few pieces of mismatched furniture, a single fan rattling in the corner fighting a losing battle against the heat. There was no television, no refrigerator that I could see. The walls were bare except for a faded picture of Jesus and an old calendar from 3 years ago. Aunt Linda, Samira's mother, was lying on a thin mattress pushed against the far wall. She looked much older than she probably was, her skin gray, her body thin and frail under a faded blanket despite the heat. When she saw us, she tried to sit up, but couldn't quite manage it. "Mama, don't!" Samira said, rushing to her side. She knelt beside the mattress and took her mother's hand. "Mama, this is Bryce, the one I told you about." Linda smiled weakly and reached out a trembling hand. I took it gently. Her skin was paper thin, her bones like bird bones. "Thank you," she said in broken English, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you for taking care of my daughter. She's a good girl. Good girl." "I know she is," I said, my throat tight. "It's my pleasure." Samira wiped tears from her eyes and stood up. "Come," Ben said, putting a hand on my shoulder. "Let Samira sit with Mama. I'll show you around." There wasn't much to show. 2 small bedrooms, one for Linda, one that Ben shared with his wife and 2 small children who were currently at his wife's mother's house. A kitchen that was barely more than a concrete counter with a single gas burner, a bathroom with a bucket and a dipper for bathing. "It's not much," Ben said, almost apologetically, "but it's home." "It's a good home," I said, because I didn't know what else to say. Ben made us lunch, rice and fried fish that he cooked on the single burner. We ate on a small wooden table set up in the yard because it was cooler outside than in. Samira sat close to me, occasionally translating when Ben's English faltered. He asked about Australia, about my work, about Sydney. "Samira says you built houses," he said. "Many houses. You must have done very well." "I did okay," I said. "Worked hard my whole life. Saved what I could." "That's very good. Here, we work hard too, but there's never enough. The rice farming, it's not like before. The price is too low. The costs are too high. And Mama, she needs medicine. So much medicine." Samira put her hand on my knee under the table, a gentle squeeze. After lunch, Ben showed me the small plot of land behind the house where he tried to grow vegetables. The soil looked exhausted, the plants struggling. "I do my best," he said, "but I'm not a farmer. I'm a carpenter. Or I was. There's no work. Everyone's too poor to build anything." "I don't want to ask you for anything," he said, his voice low. "That's not why Samira brought you here. But I want you to know, whatever you do for her, it helps all of us. Her money, it keeps us alive. Mama's medicine, my children's school fees, food. Without Samira." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. "I'll help however I can," I said, the words coming out before I even thought about them. "Whatever you need." He gripped my shoulder, his eyes suddenly bright. "You're a good man, Bryce. A very good man. You're family now, okay? Family." That afternoon I spent time with Linda while Samira and Ben went to the market. I sat beside her mattress, the fan rattling overhead, and she talked to me in her broken English about her husband, about raising 5 children, about how proud she was of all of them. "Samira is special," she said. "Always special, always caring for everyone. Too much caring. She needs someone to care for her. I do care for her," I said. "I care for her very much." "I know," Linda said, reaching out to pat my hand. "I see it. Old woman sees everything." She smiled. "You make her happy. First time in long time I see her happy." When Samira and Ben came back from the market with bags of rice and vegetables, I pulled out my wallet and handed Ben 1,000 pesos. "For the food," I said, "and whatever else you need." He tried to refuse, but I insisted. As the afternoon wore into evening, I sat outside with Samira on a bamboo bench, watching the sun set over the rice fields. The sky turned orange and pink, the heat finally starting to break. "Thank you for bringing me here," I said. "Thank you for showing me this part of your life." "Are you disappointed?" she asked. "In what?" "In how poor we are. In how little we have." I turned to her. "No, never. You come from good people, Samira. Your family loves you. That's worth more than any house or any car or any of the stuff I've spent my life accumulating. She leaned her head against my shoulder. I'm glad you came. We took the evening bus back to Angeles City. As the bus rumbled through the dark, Samira fell asleep against me, and I sat there thinking about everything I'd seen. The poverty, the struggle, the way Ben's hands shook when he talked about providing for his family, the way Linda looked at Samira like she was both the greatest blessing and the heaviest burden. I understood now why Samira did what she did. She wasn't some scheming gold digger. She was a daughter, a sister, trying to keep her family alive. And I could help. I had the means. Why wouldn't I? On the ride back to my apartment from the bus station, Samira held my hand in the tricycle. You're quiet, she said. Just thinking, I said. About what? About how I can help. Your mom needs better care. The house needs repairs. Ben needs work. Bryce, she said, turning to face me. You don't have to. I want to, I said. Let me do this, please. She didn't argue. She just squeezed my hand and rested her head on my shoulder again. I felt needed, necessary, loved. I didn't notice how perfectly it had all been arranged, how every detail had been calculated to pull at my heartstrings, to trigger my protective instincts, to make me feel like a hero instead of a mark. I didn't see the script. I didn't hear the silent agreement between Ben and Samira when they exchanged glances. I didn't question why Linda's English was suddenly so much better when it mattered, or why the house seemed staged in its poverty. I just felt the warmth of being part of something again, of mattering, of having a purpose, and I was so desperate for that feeling that I willingly walked into the trap. It was a Tuesday night, almost 10 o'clock, when I heard the frantic knocking on my door. I was already in bed, reading a book I wasn't really absorbing, when the sound cut through the quiet. Urgent, desperate. I got up and opened the door, and there was Samira, her face streaked with tears, her whole body shaking. Samira, what? She collapsed into my arms before I could finish, her face buried in my chest, her shoulders heaving with sobs. I could feel her tears soaking through my shirt. What happened? I asked, my heart hammering. What's wrong? She pulled back just enough to look at me, her eyes red and swollen, mascara running down her cheeks. It's my mama, she choked out. The hospital called. She collapsed. They took her to emergency. They said she needs surgery. Her heart, if she doesn't get it soon. Her voice broke completely, and she started sobbing again. I led her inside, closed the door, guided her to the couch. She was shaking so hard I could feel it when I sat down beside her. Okay, I said, trying to keep my voice calm, even though my own hands were trembling. Okay, tell me what they said. Exactly. She took a few shuddering breaths, wiping at her face with her hands. Ben called me an hour ago. Mama was feeling bad all day, chest pain, trouble breathing. He finally took her to the hospital. They did tests. They said her heart is very weak. She needs surgery soon, maybe this week. Or, she couldn't finish the sentence. How much? I asked. She looked down at her hands, twisting them together. 80,000 pesos. I did the math in my head, about 2,000 Australian dollars. A significant amount, sure, but not impossible. Not for me. The hospital won't do it without a deposit, she continued, her voice barely above a whisper, half up front. 40,000 before they'll even schedule it. Ben's been calling everyone, his friends, our cousins, the church. Nobody has that kind of money. Nobody. She started crying again, quieter now, more defeated. I don't know what to do, Bryce. If Mama dies because we can't afford, she's not going to die, I said firmly. She looked up at me, her eyes full of desperate hope. But how? I don't have 40,000 pesos. I don't even have 10,000. Everything I make goes to rent, food, sending money home for medicine and bills. I have nothing saved. Nothing. I'll take care of it, I said. The words came out automatic, like I'd been waiting to say them. Her eyes went wide. Bryce, no. I can't ask you to. You're not asking. I'm offering. I stood up and got my phone from the bedroom. My hands were surprisingly steady as I opened my banking app. Samira followed me, standing in the doorway, her arms wrapped around herself. Bryce, that's too much money. I can't. Yes, you can, I said, already navigating to the transfer screen. What's your account number? She just stared at me. Samira, your account number. We need to do this now so they can schedule the surgery. She gave it to me, her voice shaking. I typed it in carefully, checked it twice, then entered the amount. 80,000 pesos. I could afford it. My pension was good. I had savings. This wouldn't break me. I hit send. The screen confirmed the transfer. Sent. It's done, I said. She stared at her phone as the notification came through. Then she looked at me, and something in her face crumbled. She threw her arms around me and started crying again, but different this time. Relief, mixed with something that sounded almost like guilt. Thank you, she sobbed into my shoulder. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I don't know how to repay you. I don't know how to ever thank you enough. You don't have to repay me, I said, holding her. This is what you do for people you care about. You help. She pulled back and looked at me, her hands on my face. You saved her life. You saved my mama's life. How can I ever— Shh, I said. It's okay. It's going to be okay. She stayed with me that night. We didn't talk much. She was emotionally exhausted, her phone buzzing constantly with messages from Ben. She'd read them and show me. Ben says thank you. He says you're an angel. He says, the hospital confirmed, they can do the surgery Thursday. He says, Mama is crying. Happy crying. I felt like a hero. Like I'd actually done something that mattered. Like I'd saved a life. But later, after Samira finally fell asleep on my couch, her face still blotchy from crying, I sat alone in my bedroom and stared at my phone. The banking app still open. Transaction confirmed. 80,000 pesos. I felt something small and uncomfortable twist in my gut. A flicker of unease I couldn't quite name. Was this real? Or was this exactly what she'd wanted from the beginning? I thought about how perfectly timed it had been, how she'd shown up at night when I was alone and vulnerable, how the crying had been immediate and total, how she'd resisted just enough to make me feel like it was my idea. I thought about Mark's warning at the bar. They play the long game, mate. No, I pushed the thought away. This was different. Samira wasn't playing me. Her mother was actually sick. I'd seen Linda with my own eyes, lying on that mattress, barely able to breathe. This was a real emergency. And even if Samira had known she could come to me for help, even if she'd calculated that I would say yes, did that make her evil? Or did that just make her smart, desperate, human? She was in an impossible situation. Of course she'd turn to someone who had the means to help. That didn't mean she was using me. It meant she trusted me. I closed the banking app and put my phone down. I went back to the living room and stood there watching Samira sleep. She looked so young in the dim light, so vulnerable. I imagined her as a little girl, going fishing with her father before dawn, dreaming of becoming a nurse. I imagined her burying that dream when he died, taking on the burden of keeping her family alive. This is what you do for someone you love. You help. You show up. You don't ask questions. I told myself that over and over until the uncomfortable feeling in my gut went quiet, until I believed it, until I felt like a good man again instead of a mark. Samira started changing after that. It was subtle at first. Small things I tried to convince myself were normal. She'd cancel plans last minute, her texts coming an hour before we were supposed to meet. Sorry, I have to help Ben with something. Or, Mama's not feeling well. I need to go check on her. Or my least favorite, something came up at work. Can we reschedule? I told myself it was understandable. Her mother had just had surgery. The recovery was complicated. Ben needed help with things around the house. She had responsibilities. A family that actually needed her, unlike my kids who barely remembered I existed. But the gaps between our meetings grew longer. 3 days, 4 days, a week. When we did see each other, she seemed distracted. Her eyes would drift past me when I talked. She'd check her phone constantly, glancing at the screen, then flipping it over quickly when she caught me watching. "Who's that?" I asked one night over dinner at our usual place. She'd just looked at her phone for the 4th time in 10 minutes. "Just my brother," she said, not meeting my eyes. "Everything okay?" "Yeah, fine. He's just asking about some bills." But she didn't elaborate, and she didn't show me the message like she used to. I started noticing other things. She was wearing clothes I'd never seen before. Nice clothes. A new dress that looked expensive, form-fitting and modern. A leather handbag that had to cost at least 10,000 pesos. New shoes, gold earrings that caught the light when she turned her head. One evening, as we walked through a night market, I pointed at her phone. She'd been holding it differently, showing it off almost. "That's nice," I said. "New phone?" She glanced down at it like she'd forgotten she was holding it. "Oh, yeah. My cousin sent me money, the one in Dubai. She's always generous." "That's some cousin," I said, trying to keep my tone light. "Must have sent a lot." "She knows I needed it," Samira said, but something in her voice was defensive. My old phone was breaking. I wanted to ask more. I wanted to ask why her cousin would send money for a phone when her mother just had heart surgery. Why her cousin hadn't sent money for that. But I didn't. I was too scared of the answer. The texts became more sporadic too. I'd message her, "Good morning," and wouldn't hear back until afternoon. "How are you?" Would get a one-word response hours later. "Fine." I tried calling a few times, but she rarely answered. When she did, she sounded rushed. "Can I call you back later?" she'd say. "I'm in the middle of something." Later never came. One night, I couldn't sleep. It was past midnight, and I was lying in bed staring at the ceiling fan, the humid air pressing down on me like a weight. I grabbed my phone and scrolled through our message history. The difference was stark. 2 months ago, we'd message all day, about everything and nothing. Photos of food, jokes, complaints about the heat, good morning and good night messages that felt genuine. Now I was getting 3 texts a day if I was lucky. I thought about going to her apartment, just showing up, surprising her. But something stopped me. Fear, maybe, or the growing certainty that I wouldn't like what I found. The next evening I went to the bar where we'd first met. I didn't expect to see her there. She'd told me she'd been taking time off to help with her family, but I needed to clear my head, to be around people, to feel less alone. Mark was there. The Australian expat I'd talked to a few times, early 50s, sun-weathered skin, the kind of guy who'd been in the Philippines long enough to have seen everything twice. He was sitting at his usual spot at the bar, nursing a beer. He saw me and waved me over. "Bryce," he said as I sat down, "haven't seen you in a while. How's things?" "All right." I lied. "You still seeing that girl? Samira?" I nodded, ordering a San Miguel from the bartender. "Yeah." He took a long drink from his beer, then set it down carefully. "Look, mate, I don't want to overstep, but I've been here 5 years. I've seen this play out 100 times. "Seen what play out?" I asked, though I knew exactly what he meant. "Girls like her," he said, his voice low enough that only I could hear. "They're not bad people. They're just surviving. But they've got a system. They find a guy, usually older, usually lonely. They're sweet. They're charming. They make you feel like you're special, and you are special, for a while, until you're not." "Samira's not like that," I said, but my voice sounded hollow even to me. "Maybe not," Mark said. "I hope I'm wrong. But mate, They play the long game. First, it's just spending time together. Then it's meeting the family. Then there's an emergency. Sick mother, broken roof, brother needs money. It's always something. And you pay because you care, because you want to help, because you think you're building something real. I stared at my beer. Everything he was saying felt like a punch to the gut because it was exactly what had happened. Exactly. How much have you given her? Mark asked gently. Maybe more. Mark let out a low whistle. And what have you gotten back? It's not about getting something back, I snapped. I helped her family. Her mother needed surgery. Did you see the medical records? He asked. Did you talk to the doctors yourself? Look, Mark said, putting a hand on my shoulder. I'm not saying she's lying about everything. Maybe her mom really is sick. Maybe she really does care about you. But mate, you need to be careful. Pay attention. If she's canceling plans, if she's always on her phone, if she's suddenly got new stuff she can't explain, that's not a good sign. She said her cousin sent money, I said weakly, from Dubai. Mark just looked at me. He didn't have to say anything. The look said it all. I finished my beer in silence. Mark bought me another. We sat there together, two expats who'd come to the Philippines for different reasons but were learning the same hard lessons. I want it to be real, I finally said. I know, mate, Mark replied. We all do. That's why it works. When I got home that night, I tried calling Samira. It rang 6 times, then went to voicemail. I texted her. Can we talk? Nothing. I lay in bed staring at my phone like a teenager, waiting for the little dots to appear that meant she was typing. They never did. She finally replied 2 hours later. Sorry, phone died. Everything okay? I typed back. Just wanted to hear your voice. Tomorrow, she replied. I'll call you tomorrow, promise. But tomorrow came and went with no call. I told myself she was busy. I told myself her phone really had died and she'd forgotten to charge it. I told myself the new clothes and the new phone were innocent, that her cousin in Dubai was real, that there was a perfectly logical explanation for everything. I told myself I wasn't being played. I told myself I mattered. But deep down, in a place I didn't want to acknowledge, I was starting to realize the truth, and it terrified me. I decided I was going to bring Samira to Australia. It made sense. It solved everything. We could start fresh, away from the bars, away from the poverty, away from whatever was pulling her away from me. She could study nursing like she'd always wanted. We could build something real, something permanent. I could introduce her to my kids eventually, once they saw how serious we were. The idea consumed me for days. I researched visa requirements, read through immigration websites until my eyes hurt, watched YouTube videos of other couples who'd successfully navigated the process. It was possible. Complicated, expensive, but possible. I brought it up one evening over dinner at a restaurant she loved, a small Italian place run by an expat who made surprisingly good pasta. What if you came to Sydney with me? I said, setting down my fork. She looked up from her plate, her eyes widening. What? To Australia. What if you came with me? We could apply for a partner visa. I've looked into it. It takes time, maybe a year or more, but it's possible. For a moment, she just stared at me. Then her face broke into the widest smile I'd seen in weeks. Are you serious? She asked. I'm serious. You could go to nursing school. Actually pursue your dream. We could get a place together, somewhere nice. Start fresh. She reached across the table and grabbed both my hands. That would be amazing, Bryce. That would be. I don't even know what to say. Is it really possible? With the right documentation, yes. We'd need to prove our relationship is genuine. Photos, messages, bank statements. We'd need to show we've spent time together, that we know each other's families. We have all that. And it's expensive? She asked. I nodded. Several $1,000s. Maybe 5,000 or 6,000 Australian. For applications, fees, agent fees, medical exams, police clearances. But I can cover it. Her eyes got bright with tears. You would do that for me? Of course I would. I said, I want a future with you. A real one. She got up and came around the table and hugged me right there in the restaurant, not caring who was watching. Yes, she said into my ear. Yes, I want that too. So I hired an immigration agent, a guy named Carlos who had an office in Makati, about an hour and a half from Angeles City. His website looked professional, his reviews were mostly positive, and he specialized in partner visas for Australian citizens. I paid him $1,200 up front for the initial consultation and document preparation. Carlos was in his 40s, professional, efficient. He laid out the process in his air-conditioned office while Samira and I sat across from him taking notes. The key is proving a genuine relationship, Carlos said. The visa officers are extremely skeptical of age gap relationships, especially when one partner is from Southeast Asia and the other is a Western retiree. They've seen too many scams. This isn't a scam, I said firmly. I believe you, Carlos said, but you need to convince them. That means documentation. Lots of it. Photos together, covering the span of your relationship. Not just posed pictures, but candid ones, doing normal couple things, text message histories, phone records showing frequent communication, bank statements proving financial support. We have all that, I said, glancing at Samira. She nodded, though she looked nervous. Good. You'll also both need to write statutory declarations explaining how you met, how the relationship developed, your future plans together. Be detailed. Be honest. They'll interview you separately and compare your answers. Over the next month, I paid for everything. Birth certificates had to be ordered and translated. $200. Police clearances from both countries. $300. Medical examinations by approved doctors. $400. More consultations with Carlos. Another $1,000. Application fees to the Australian government. $3,200. Every week there was another cost, another document, another requirement. I stopped tracking the total. It didn't matter. This was our future. Samira seemed excited at first. She talked about what it would be like in Sydney, where we'd live, what nursing programs she'd apply to. We looked at apartments online together, at suburbs with good schools even though we didn't have kids. We were playing house, imagining a life that felt more real with every conversation. But as the interview date approached, something shifted. She got quieter, more withdrawn. She'd stare at the paperwork with an expression I couldn't quite read. You okay? I asked one evening as we reviewed her statutory declaration for the 10th time. Yeah, she said, just nervous. It'll be fine, I said. We just tell the truth. But what if they don't believe us? She asked. What if they think I'm using you? You're not using me, I said, and they'll see that. But I could see the doubt in her eyes. The day of the interview, we dressed formally and took a taxi to the Australian Embassy in Manila. It was a 2-hour drive from Angeles City, through traffic that tested my patience. Samira was silent the whole way, staring out the window, her hands clenched in her lap. Hey, I said, reaching over to take her hand. We've got this. She nodded but didn't look at me. The embassy was intimidating. High walls, security checkpoints, metal detectors, stern-faced guards. We went through multiple layers of security before finally being escorted to a small interview room with fluorescent lights and no windows. The visa officer was already there waiting for us, Mr. Ramirez, Filipino, maybe late 40s, with glasses and an expression that made it clear he'd already decided we were lying. He looked at us like we were a problem to be solved. Mr. Bryce, Miss Samira, he said, gesturing to the chairs across from his desk. Please sit. We sat. I tried to project confidence, but my palms were sweating. Let's begin, Ramirez said. opening a file folder. How did you two meet? I explained. The bar, Fields Avenue. The conversation that lasted hours. How natural it felt. And you're how old, Mr. Bryce? Ramirez asked, even though it was obviously in the file in front of him. 68. And you, Miss Samira? 24. Ramirez wrote something down. I could feel the judgment radiating off him. How long have you known each other? 4 months, I said. He raised an eyebrow. 4 months. And you're applying for a partner visa. Yes, I said firmly. We're serious about each other. When you know, you know. I see, Ramirez said in a tone that made it clear he saw something very different. He turned to Samira. Miss Samira, what does Mr. Bryce do for work? He's retired, she said. Her voice was quieter than I'd ever heard it. He used to build houses in Sydney. And what do you do? I work in a bar. What kind of bar? She hesitated. I could see her struggling with the answer. A hostess bar, she finally said. Ramirez leaned back in his chair. I see. The rest of the interview was brutal. He picked apart every detail of our relationship. Why hadn't we lived together? We were taking it slow, I said, building trust. Why hadn't I met more of her family? I met her mother and brother. That's her immediate family. Why was there such an age gap? Age is just a number when you connect with someone. Ramirez asked Samira about my favorite food, my favorite color, my childhood. She stumbled on some of the answers. I'd never told her about my childhood because it wasn't something I liked to talk about. She guessed wrong about my favorite color. When he asked her what suburb I lived in Sydney, she said Bondi, when it was actually Parramatta. It's easy to mix up, I said, jumping in. Australian suburbs sound similar. Ramirez gave me a look that said I shouldn't be helping her. He asked about our future plans, our finances, how we'd support ourselves. He asked if I'd given her money, and how much. I tried to downplay it, but he pulled out bank records that showed every transfer. 80,000 pesos here, he said, pointing. 10,000 here, 5,000 here. That's a significant amount of financial support for a 4-month relationship. Her mother needed surgery, I said. I helped. That's what partners do. Or, that's what someone being exploited does, Ramirez said flatly. I felt anger flare in my chest. I'm not being exploited. That remains to be seen, Ramirez said. When it was over, he handed me a paper without ceremony. We'll review your application and notify you of the decision. It typically takes 6 to 8 weeks. You're free to go. We left the embassy in silence. The taxi ride back was even worse than the ride there. Samira stared out the window, her face unreadable. That went okay, I said, trying to sound optimistic. We answered everything. He didn't believe us, Samira said quietly. He thought I was using you. He doesn't know us, I said. The decision won't be based on his feelings. It'll be based on the evidence. But even as I said it, I wasn't sure I believed it. 6 weeks later, I got the email. I was sitting in my apartment when the notification popped up on my phone. From the Department of Home Affairs, I opened it with shaking hands. Application denied. Insufficient evidence of a genuine relationship. The applicant has not demonstrated that the relationship is genuine and continuing, or that the parties are not in a relationship primarily for the purpose of the applicant obtaining a permanent visa to remain in Australia. I read it 3 times. Each time it felt like someone was punching me in the gut. 12,000 Australian dollars. Gone. All the hope, all the planning, all the imagining our future together. Denied. That night I showed Samira the email. She was at my apartment, something that had become rare. She read it in silence, sitting on my couch, her face blank. I'm sorry, she said, handing the phone back. We can reapply, I said, hearing the desperation in my own voice. We can get more evidence, more photos, more documentation. We just need to build a stronger case. Bryce, she said, and something in her tone made me stop. Maybe this was a stupid idea. What? No, this wasn't stupid. This was our plan. They don't believe us, she said. They think I'm a scammer. They think you're a fool. Maybe they're right. Don't say that, I said. Maybe it's better this way, she said quietly. What are you talking about? She stood up and grabbed her bag. I need to go. Samira, wait. I just need to think, okay? I need time to think. She left, just walked out, and I sat there alone in my apartment, staring at the rejection letter on my screen, realizing I'd spent $12,000 on a dream that maybe was never real in the first place. She didn't come over the next night, or the night after that. For 3 days, I barely heard from her. Just short texts. I'm okay. Just need space. And I sat there, waiting, wondering if this was the beginning of the end, wondering if I'd already lost her, wondering if I'd ever really had her at all. I hadn't heard from Samira in 3 days. No calls, no texts, just silence. I told myself she needed space, that she was upset about the visa, but something darker was gnawing at me. On the 4th day, I couldn't take it anymore. I took a tricycle to her apartment, a small place she rented in a neighborhood I'd only been to once before. I knocked on the door. No answer. I knocked again. The landlady, a woman named Myrna, came out of the adjacent unit. She looked at me with something like pity. She's not here, Myrna said. Do you know when she'll be back? She hesitated. She's with someone. My stomach dropped. What do you mean? I shouldn't say. Please, Myrna sighed. There's a man. He comes here a lot. Young guy. Local. They're probably at the market or something. I felt like the ground had disappeared beneath me. How long? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. I don't know. Months, maybe. I sat down on the steps outside and waited. I don't know how long I was there. An hour. 2. My mind was spinning. Then I heard laughing. I looked up and saw them. Samira and a guy, maybe 25, lean and cocky, his arm around her shoulders. They were holding shopping bags, smiling at each other like they didn't have a care in the world. They froze when they saw me. Samira's face went pale. Bryce, she said. I stood up slowly. Who's this? She didn't answer. The guy, Jojo, looked me up and down and smirked. This the foreigner? He said in English, his accent thick. I ignored him. I looked at Samira. How long? Bryce, please. How long? My voice cracked. She looked down. It's not what you think. Then what is it? Jojo laughed. Man, you're really that stupid. Samira snapped at him in Tagalog, something sharp, but he just shrugged and walked past me into the apartment. She stood there, her arms wrapped around herself. I'm sorry, she said. That was it. That was all she gave me. I turned and walked away. I didn't yell. I didn't beg. I just left. That night, I sat in my apartment and opened my banking app. I went through every transaction from the past 4 months. 80,000 pesos for her mother's surgery, 10,000 for her brother's business loan, 5,000 for her rent, 3,000 for her phone, groceries, transportation, meals, gifts, visa fees, agent fees, translation costs. Over 25,000 Australian dollars. Gone. I'd given her my future, and she'd given me nothing. I booked a flight back to Sydney, one way, leaving in 5 days. I didn't tell Samira. I didn't tell anyone except my landlord. I just started packing. I threw away most of what I'd brought. Clothes I didn't need, books I'd never read, souvenirs I'd bought thinking I'd have someone to share them with. On my last night, I sat on the balcony of my apartment and looked out at Angeles City. The lights, the noise, the life I'd convinced myself I could be part of. I thought about Barbara. I thought about how much I'd wanted to feel alive again after she died. How desperate I was for connection, for meaning. Samira hadn't tricked me. Not really. I'd tricked myself. I'd wanted so badly to believe that someone could love me again that I ignored every red flag, every warning, every moment of doubt. Mark showed up the next morning to drive me to the airport. "You doing all right, mate?" he asked as we loaded my bags into his truck. "I don't know," I said honestly. We drove in silence for a while. Then he said, "You're not the first, you know, and you won't be the last." "I know. You'll be all right. Takes time, but you'll be all right." I nodded. At the airport, he helped me with my bags and shook my hand. "Take care of yourself, Bryce. You too." I checked in, went through security, and sat at the gate. My flight was delayed an hour. I pulled out my phone and stared at it. Part of me wanted to call her, to ask why, to hear her voice one more time. But I didn't. There was nothing left to say. When they finally called my flight, I stood up and walked toward the gate. I didn't look back. The plane lifted off and I watched Angela's city shrink beneath me. The lights blurred together until they were just a glow on the horizon. Then darkness. I closed my eyes. I thought about what I'd lost. The money. The dream. The belief that I could start over. But somewhere, buried beneath the grief and shame, I felt something else. Relief. I wasn't angry at Samira. I wasn't even sure I blamed her. She'd done what she had to do to survive. And I'd done what I had to do to feel human again. We both got something, and we both lost something. I guess that's just how it goes. The flight attendant came by with drinks. I ordered a whiskey, my first in months. It burned going down, but it felt good, real. I was going home. Not the same man who left. Not better, not worse, just different, and maybe, eventually, that would be enough.